Adobe is one of the strangest companies in the creative world because millions of people depend on it, but many of those same people openly hate it. Photoshop is still the language of professional image editing. Illustrator is still deeply embedded in design work. Premiere Pro and After Effects are still everywhere in video and motion graphics. InDesign still matters in publishing. Acrobat still controls a huge part of the PDF economy. For many creators, agencies, editors, designers, photographers, and businesses, Adobe is not just software. It is infrastructure, and that is exactly the problem. People usually hate weak products because they do not work. But Adobe is hated for a different reason. It is hated because its products work so well and became so important that leaving them can feel almost impossible. That is the real story behind Adobe. It is not a failed company. It is not a dying company. It is not a business that creators abandoned. In fact, financially, Adobe is still extremely strong. In fiscal year 2025, Adobe generated almost $24 billion in revenue with high margins, strong cash flow, and a business model that most software companies would love to have. But underneath that financial success is a growing resentment. Creators feel trapped by subscriptions. They complain about cancellation fees. They worry about AI and data use. They compare Adobe to cheaper tools like Canva, Figma, DaVinci Resolve, Affinity, Blender, GIMP, Krita, and other open source alternatives. And many of them describe Adobe with the same strange emotional contradiction. They need it, but they do not trust it. So how did Adobe become the company creators love to hate? To understand that, you have to go back to the moment Adobe changed the rules of creative software. For decades, Adobe sold software in a way that felt more like ownership. You bought a version of Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere, or the full Creative Suite, and you could keep using it. You might upgrade every few years, but you were not paying every month forever. The software was expensive, but once you bought it, it felt like yours. That changed when Adobe moved toward Creative Cloud. In 2011, Adobe introduced Creative Cloud. Then, in 2013, it accelerated the shift and effectively moved future development away from the old Creative Suite model. New features, updates, compatibility improvements, and the future of Adobe's creative tools would live inside a subscription. From Adobe's perspective, this was one of the best business decisions it ever made. Instead of relying on one-time license sales, Adobe could turn its customer base into recurring revenue. Investors loved it because subscriptions are predictable. A customer paying every month is more valuable than a customer who buys once and waits 5 years to upgrade. But for many creators, it felt like the beginning of software rent. A designer who once bought Photoshop now had to keep paying to maintain access. A freelancer who only needed certain tools occasionally still had to think about monthly costs. A photographer, student, small studio, or YouTuber could no longer treat Adobe like a tool they owned. They had to treat it like a bill that never ended. This is where the resentment began. At first, Adobe could defend the move by saying Creative Cloud gave users constant updates, cloud storage, better collaboration, and access to a wider set of apps. And there was truth to that. The subscription model did make Adobe more flexible in some ways. Users did not have to pay a huge upfront price for the full suite. They could subscribe monthly or annually. Teams could manage licenses more easily, businesses could scale seats up and down, new features could arrive faster, but the trade-off was ownership. Creators were no longer buying tools, they were renting access to a system, and that system became incredibly profitable. By 2025, Adobe had become almost a pure subscription business. The company's revenue was about $23.8 billion, and the overwhelming majority came from subscriptions. Its gross margin was around 89%, and its net margin was around 30%. Those are not the numbers of a broken company. Those are the numbers of a software machine. This is the financial core of Adobe's power. It does not just sell creativity tools, it sells access to workflows that professionals cannot easily abandon, and the lock-in is not only about price, it is much deeper than that. A designer may want to leave Photoshop, but their clients send PSD files. A studio may want to leave Illustrator, but its archives are full of Adobe files. And a video editor may want to leave Premiere, but the team uses After Effects, Adobe libraries, and existing project templates. A company may want to switch design software, but its employees, contractors, agencies, and clients are already trained around Adobe. This is why Adobe's lock-in is so powerful. It is not just a subscription. It is a professional standard. The file formats matter, the workflows matter, the plugins matter, the training matters, the hiring expectations matter, the client expectations matter. The cloud libraries, shared assets, admin controls, and enterprise tools all make Adobe more than a collection of apps. They make it a coordination system for creative work. That is why creators can hate Adobe and still pay for it. The product is not optional for everyone. In some industries, not using Adobe can create friction. You might be able to do the work in another tool, but if the client expects an Adobe file, the team uses Adobe shortcuts, and the agency pipeline is built around Adobe, switching becomes a cost. Adobe understands this, and financially, it has used that position extremely well, but the same thing that makes Adobe profitable also makes people angry. Because when customers feel like they cannot leave, every price increase feels more personal. Every confusing billing page feels more hostile. Every cancellation problem feels less like an accident and more like a trap. This is where Adobe's cancellation controversy became so damaging. One of the biggest complaints around Adobe has been the annual billed monthly subscription model. Many users thought they were paying month to month because the price was shown as a monthly payment. But in reality, some plans locked them into an annual contract. If they tried to cancel early, they could face an early termination fee. From Adobe's perspective, this may have been a normal subscription structure. From the customer's perspective, it often felt misleading. The monthly price looked flexible, but the contract behaved like a yearly commitment, and that difference created a huge amount of anger. Users complained about surprise fees, unclear trial conversions, confusing cancellation flows, and support processes that felt designed to keep them paying. Better Business Bureau complaints and Trustpilot reviews show the same recurring themes: billing problems, cancellation difficulty, payment issues, and users feeling trapped inside subscriptions they thought they could leave. This was not only a social media issue, it became a government issue. In 2024, the Federal Trade Commission and the U.S. Department of Justice took action against Adobe, accusing the company of hiding fees and making cancellation difficult. Adobe later agreed to a settlement worth about $150 million, including civil penalties and free services for affected users. Adobe did not admit wrongdoing, but the case confirmed something important. The anger around cancellation was not just random internet drama. Regulators saw a real consumer protection problem. And for creators, this reinforced the existing belief that Adobe's business model was not built around trust. It was built around retention. That is the key word: retention. In software, retention is valuable. Investors want users to stay subscribed. Companies want predictable revenue. But when retention feels like a product is so useful that people love staying, it strengthens the brand. When retention feels like people are trapped by contracts, file formats, and cancellation fees, it damages the brand. Adobe's problem is that both forms of retention exist at the same time. Some people stay because the products are genuinely good, others stay because leaving is too painful. Then AI made the trust problem worse. When generative AI exploded, Adobe had to respond. Tools like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, OpenAI image models, and Canva's AI features threatened to change creative work. Adobe could not ignore the trend, so it launched Firefly, its own generative AI system, and began integrating AI into Photoshop, Illustrator, Express, and other products. Strategically, this made sense. Adobe had to protect its position. If AI was going to change image generation, design, video, and marketing content, Adobe wanted that change to happen inside Adobe products, not outside them. But creators had a different worry. If Adobe controls the tools, stores creative work in the cloud, and trains AI systems, what happens to user content? Who benefits when AI makes creative work faster? Are artists being compensated? Are creators helping train the systems that may eventually compete with them? In 2024, Adobe updated its terms of use, and the backlash was immediate. Many users interpreted the language as giving Adobe broad access to their work, possibly for AI training. Social media exploded, creators threatened to leave. The fear was simple: the company that already controlled their software might now also use their creative output to build AI systems. Adobe responded by clarifying that it does not train Firefly on customer content stored in Creative Cloud. It said Firefly was trained on licensed content, Adobe stock, and public domain material where copyright had expired. It also positioned Firefly as commercially safer than many competing generative AI tools, especially for enterprise customers worried about legal risk. That was a smart business strategy. Commercially safe AI is exactly what brands and corporations want to hear. If a marketing department is afraid of copyright lawsuits, Adobe can say its AI tools are built for safer commercial use. But the clarification did not fully repair trust. The problem was not only what Adobe said after the backlash, the problem was that creators were already suspicious. They already felt locked in. They already felt that Adobe optimized for revenue first and user trust second. So when the terms of use language looked broad, many users assumed the worst. This is why AI became another layer in the love to hate story. Adobe is trying to convince creators that Firefly helps them, but many creators worry that AI tools will devalue their work, reduce demand for human creativity, and benefit Adobe more than the people whose labor made the creative ecosystem valuable in the first place. To be fair, Adobe is not in the worst position on AI ethics compared with some competitors. Its Firefly strategy is more cautious than many open models, and Adobe has paid some Adobe stock contributors bonuses related to AI training. It also promotes content credentials, a kind of digital label that can show how content was created or edited and whether AI was involved. But those steps do not solve the deeper concern. Creators are not only asking whether Adobe's AI is legal, they are asking whether the future Adobe is building is good for them. And while Adobe deals with that trust problem, competitors are attacking from every direction. Canva is attacking from below. It is simpler, cheaper for many users, browser-based, template-driven, and built for everyday design. Canva does not need to replace Photoshop for high-end professionals to hurt Adobe. It only needs to replace the thousands of small design tasks that used to require Adobe by default: social posts, presentations, flyers, thumbnails, simple videos, marketing assets, and brand templates. That is a serious threat because many people who once might have learned Adobe first now learn Canva first. If the next generation of casual creators, marketers, small businesses, and social media teams grows up inside Canva, Adobe loses default status in a huge part of the market. Figma attacked Adobe from another direction. It changed product design by making collaboration feel native. Designers, developers, product managers, and clients could all work around the same live file. Adobe had its own product, Adobe XD, but Figma became the standard in UI and UX design. Adobe tried to buy Figma for $20 billion, but regulators pushed back, and the deal was terminated. That failed acquisition was revealing. Adobe did not just want another design app. It wanted control over the tool that had become the center of modern product design. Figma showed that Adobe could still be beaten when a competitor built a better workflow for a specific category. DaVinci Resolve is attacking Adobe in video. Blackmagic offers a powerful video editing, color grading, visual effects, and audio workflow with a strong free version and a one-time paid studio version. For YouTubers, filmmakers, editors, and colorists who hate subscriptions, Resolve is one of the clearest alternatives to Premiere Pro. Affinity has attacked Adobe's subscription model directly by offering professional creative tools without the same recurring payment structure that made users angry. Open-source tools like Blender, GIMP, Krita, Inkscape, Scribus, Darktable, and others give cost-sensitive creators even more ways to avoid Adobe entirely. None of these competitors replaces all of Adobe at once. That is important. Adobe is not facing one Adobe killer. It is facing many smaller attacks across different parts of the workflow. Canva takes everyday design. Figma takes product design. Resolve takes video editing and color. Blender dominates 3D. Affinity appeals to anti-subscription designers. Open source tools serve people who care about ownership, cost, and flexibility. This is how empires usually weaken. Not all at once, but category by category. Still, Adobe remains extremely hard to kill because it sits at the center of professional creative work. Its tools are deep, powerful, integrated, and familiar. For many agencies and enterprises, Adobe is the safe choice. It is easier to keep paying than to retrain teams, rebuild workflows, convert archives, and explain to clients why files are no longer Adobe native. That is why Adobe can be hated and still grow. The company has built one of the best financial models in software. High-margin subscriptions attached to professional workflows with high switching costs. The more important the tools become, the more predictable the revenue becomes. But that same model creates a long-term risk. Adobe's danger is not that all creators quit tomorrow. They will not. The lock-in is too strong and the products are too useful. The danger is that Adobe becomes a necessary evil while competitors become the tools people actually like. That matters because creative habits form early. A student who learns Canva, Figma, Resolve, Blender, or Affinity first may not feel the same loyalty to Adobe that older professionals did. A small business that builds its brand system in Canva may never need InDesign. A YouTuber who learns Resolve may never subscribe to Premiere. A startup that designs in Figma may never touch Adobe XD. Adobe may keep the high-end professional market for a long time, but the edges of the empire can still erode. This is why the phrase creators love to hate Adobe is so accurate. They love the power of the tools. They hate the feeling of dependence. They love the depth of Photoshop. They hate paying forever. They love the ecosystem when it works. They hate the cancellation flow when they want to leave. They love the professional standard. They hate that the standard gives Adobe so much power. Adobe did not become hated because it forgot how to build creative software. It became hated because it learned how to monetize creative dependence better than almost anyone else, and that is the financial story. Adobe turned creativity into recurring revenue. It converted ownership into access, transformed file formats, workflows, teams, cloud libraries, enterprise administration, and professional expectations into a subscription machine. That machine is extremely profitable, but it also makes users feel like the company wins whether they are happy or not. The future of Adobe depends on whether it can reduce that resentment without damaging the economics that made it so successful. It could make cancellation clearer. It could make pricing easier to understand. It could improve interoperability. It could be more transparent about AI training and creator compensation. It could treat trust not as a public relations problem, but as part of the product, because Adobe's biggest threat is not only Canva, Figma, Resolve, Affinity, or open source. Its biggest threat is the belief that Adobe is not on the creator's side. For now, creators may keep paying because they have to. But every time Adobe creates friction, every time it feels confusing, every time users feel trapped, it gives competitors a marketing campaign for free. That is the paradox at the heart of Adobe. The company is powerful because creators cannot easily leave, but creators hate it for the exact same reason. And if enough new creators grow up using tools that feel cheaper, simpler, fairer, and more trustworthy, Adobe may not lose its empire overnight, but it could slowly lose something just as important. It could lose the next generation's default.